starting from the 40 days of Lent, beginning on Ash Wednesday, moving through Palm Sunday, Holy Wednesday, Maundy Thursday, and then on to Good Friday. We are now journeying through to Ascension Day on May the 21st, before finally arriving at Pentecost at the end of this month. Although Holy Week is now behind us, we are still moving through the second set of 40 days of Easter in the Christian calendar. Easter for me is the principal part of the Christian year. Whereas Christmas is a time for celebration and coming together as family with joy and perhaps some light-heartedness, Easter is sober, contemplative, and a time of reflective thinking. The tradition of Ash Wednesday reminds us that from dust we came and from dust we shall return. This is a reminder of the fragility of humanity, our vulnerability, our weakness. Easter marks events that disturb those who had followed Jesus. The disciples who were later to be commissioned as apostles were left bewildered and no doubt at a loss as to how to respond to the events we now mark during Easter week. The life of Peter can be particularly drawn upon during Easter. Have you ever wondered, as I have, as to why Jesus said he will build the church upon Peter and not John, described as the disciple that he loved? Perhaps Peter was given the keys to the kingdom because of his humanity and weakness. At the Passover meal, Peter had relied on his own confidence and self-assurance, making a bold, but at that time empty declaration he would follow Jesus into prison, and even if that meant his own death. He had an image of himself that did not match the reality, but he was willing to pick himself up after a time of reflection. Peter had to face himself and his own vulnerability, and then come back and try again. He would separate himself, taking himself off, even in part driven by his own anxieties. But Peter is an Easter person. While sharing the Passover meal, Jesus told Peter that he would deny him 3 times, giving him a reality check and challenging Peter to be more self-aware and grounded. But Jesus knew that Peter would soon return to the group, having slipped away following seeing the empty tomb for himself. But we can see that something very special had happened in the following hours. As we have looked at in my previous message, while the disciples and others were together in the house where they had celebrated Passover, Cleopas and a companion had made their way to Emmaus. And during that journey, the risen Jesus had met with them. And although it was late afternoon, they'd made their way back straight to Jerusalem, no doubt eager to tell the news. But on arrival, the disciples had news of their own. The resurrection story was true because Peter had seen Jesus. Some years later, when writing his first letter to the church of Corinth, St. Paul refers to being told that Jesus had appeared to Peter before revealing himself to the disciples. So we can consider that Peter between running to the tomb, going off by himself, and later returning to the disciples, that the risen Christ had appeared to him. Peter, as with the others, we know had not accepted the report of the women, and they were cynical and thought their story was nonsense. But having seen the empty tomb, Peter was left puzzled, remaining unconvinced about the woman's account of a resurrection and visions of angels. It seems that Cleopas and his companion had been with the disciples at the time of the woman's return from the tomb, and they were aware of Peter going off to check out the story. Although the Gospel according to Luke makes no mention of it, John, the beloved disciple, had raced off ahead of Luke to the tomb. The Gospel of John gives a focused account of this, and the Gospel of Luke does record that on the Emmaus Road, Cleopas told Jesus, who was at that point unbeknown to them and seen as a stranger, that some of those who were with us had followed up on the woman's story. This does indicate that although Luke's Gospel only writes of Peter, it acknowledges that he was not alone when investigating the woman's report. It may be that the reason for Luke's Gospel having a focus on Peter and the encounter on the road to Emmaus is because it was Luke himself who was the companion of Cleopas. John's Gospel tells us that having seen the empty tomb, Peter and the beloved disciple had different reactions. John believed, Peter did not. Peter, when in previous times was asked by Jesus, "Who do you say I am?" and having answered, "You are the Christ," now had doubts in his heart, was perplexed and disorientated. Jesus knew Peter's thoughts and his feelings. Jesus knew that Peter had separated himself from the others and the wider disciples. The last encounter that Jesus had with Peter was in the courtyard of the high priest. Jesus, catching Peter's eye as he walked past, a gaze following his 3 denials, had brought Peter to bitter weeping. Peter's declaration of loyalty at the Passover meal had been rash, perhaps even juvenile. Peter now experienced an anguish, a deep pain, as in his own mind he had let Jesus down, and he had met the reality of his own weakness. But Jesus went to find Peter in his aloneness and his alienation. For Peter, this was a lesson in humanity. Mary Magdalene, it seems, had followed along behind Peter and John as they had both hurried to the tomb. Remaining behind after the two had left, Mary then had her own encounter with Jesus. Mary Magdalene, even having experienced the collective angelic vision with a group of women who had gone together to complete the burial rituals, now had an individual encounter with the supernatural. Mary was suffering the grief and the bereavement of Jesus, and also the pain of thinking that his body had been snatched, denying her the final act of affection and care. After meeting individually with Mary Magdalene, the risen Jesus had sought out Peter, reminding us of the parable of the lost sheep. The little flock being together, hiding away in Jerusalem, and Peter astray, alone, separated, and perhaps with a cauldron of thought and feeling. We read of Jesus letting himself be known to Cleopas, and perhaps Luke if he was the companion walking the Emmaus Road. In the narratives, we find the grief of Mary Magdalene, the anxiety and the lostness of Peter, and also the disciples who, in the late afternoon or early evening, were fearfully locked behind a closed door, no doubt experiencing insecurity. Think about what is going on in the minds of the disciples. What emotions were being felt? What thoughts had gnawed in their minds? What questions were being asked? Would there have been questions such as, what do we do now? What is going to happen next? Where does this leave us? Jesus addressed Mary Magdalene's distraught pain, Peter's presumptuousness, his immature faith, and his need for restoration. He met the theological questions of Cleopas. He was present with them individually, speaking into their doubt. Jesus was propagating a new depth of understanding in the lives of the disciples and his followers. Their faith now being seasoned by their experience. Jesus took the disciples from sleeping on the job in the Garden of Gethsemane, where they were too tired to pray for the night, and pointed them towards the revitalizing experience of Pentecost. In the recent week, I have received many messages from around the world: Ukraine, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Congo, Cuba, Germany, Canada, the United States. The commonality of experience is clear. As with Peter, who experienced anguish and foreboding during the crucifixion, and then wonder, astonishment, apprehension and unease at seeing the empty tomb. We too, around the world, look at the future with some trepidation. The question is one of facing a range of doubts and allowing active faith to be propagated as we face our individual uncertainties. But it is also a time of collective opportunity to reevaluate our understanding and approach of what it means to be community. The time we are living in presents us with an invitation to trust. It is an invitation where Jesus knocks at the door, an invitation of experiencing a maturing and seasoning of faith, an invitation to experience faith in a new way, and to experience our world with a deeper appreciation and humility.